Hello, dear listener, and welcome, or Jingiwala, to the Indigenous Governance Podcast, a Trans-Tasman collaboration between Australian Indigenous Governance Institute, or AIGI, and the Community Governance Aotearoa. I am Regina Rogers. I am a proud freshwater Wiradjuri woman with strong ties to this beautiful saltwater Bundjalung nation. I am the CEO of AIGI, and AIGI is the Indigenous-led centre dedicated to advancing governance, knowledge and excellence, empowering our First Nations peoples through world-class resources and professional development.
Kia ora koutou, ko waio, he uri tēnei no Ngāti Porou, te aitanga mahaki, rungu whakaata me Ngāti Kahungunu. Ko Rosanna Hiha tōku ingoa, ko tūmu whakarai o Community Governance Aotearoa. Community Governance Aotearoa supports and strengthens not-for-profit organisations across the community and voluntary sector. This includes iwi Māori entities and organisations. We lead kaupapa that supports great sector governance leadership in Aotearoa.
So before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands we recorded these episodes from and pay our respects to our elders past and present across all the beautiful lands where our listeners are joining us from today.
He puna mātauranga kia ora ai te tangata, a source of knowledge to enlighten and sustain our people. At Community Governance Aotearoa, we honour the wisdom of those who came before us, the lived knowledge of today, and our responsibility to those who follow. Tēnā te mihi nui.
So in this podcast series, we're honoured to hear from the Indigenous governance leaders and experts as they explore Indigenous governance, nation building, and the pathways towards stronger, self-determined futures. We recognise that Māori and Australian First Nations communities bring a distinct histories, protocols, governing traditions, and lived experiences. So by learning from one another, we aim to support governance practices that reflect the unique contexts, priorities, and strengths of our communities. Through open conversation between peers, the series shares real experiences, cultural insights, and practical lessons from leaders who work within their communities.
Together, these conversations offer a powerful look at how Indigenous communities are strengthening governance and building futures grounded in culture, community, and self-determination. Enjoy the series.
Good morning, Mihi. I'd love to start this conversation with understanding a little bit more about you and invite you to kick us off.
Kia ora, nā me kia koe. Ko waio, ko mahu ki te rangi tuku waka, ko maunga keke tuku maunga, ko mo watamata tuku moana, ko rāke tuku marae, ko tupere te tangata, ko Ngāti Whātua te iwi, ko Mihi Blair toko ingoa. E noho ana ki Tamaki Makaurau Aotearoa ahau. Kia ora, Alex. My name is Mihi Blair. I come from my iwi in Tamaki Makaurau called Ngāti Whātua. I just described my maunga of Maungawhau, Mount Eden, my moana of Watamata, and my marae at Ōrākei. And I'm currently living in my own city on my own whenua in Auckland. It's really great to be here. Just really pleased to be able to share my experiences as an iwi person. My current role and my real job is Deputy Chief Executive at Hātua St John's. My role has been as Māori Health and Engagement. It's the first time it's been in St John's for over 141 years, so I'm absolutely honoured and privileged to be in this role. And I've got governance experience for within my iwi group of Ngāti Whātua ki Kaipara, which is out northern area of outside of Auckland. I've been on there for about a year and a half for my iwi as a whānau rep, and also have other governance experience in housing. So it's been a real pleasure and learning at this time I've been in these roles.
Thanks for that. So nara wanya yinyaman na Alex taring gabi dian na biari and the yingan and the yin nya manda ganiura nya Aotearoa Māori na Taranga Bonjoman the Guja na Bubai Murubalaman Yaliaman number one Manda. So good morning, my name's Alex, and I've just explained in my traditional language of the Gubbi people that I am of those lands and people. I was born in Warramungal country though in Central Australia, so quite a remote community, and have spent time across both Adelaide and Melbourne or Wairarong country currently living in the Adelaide Hills in Ngāti, Ghana country. And in my day-to-day role, I work in a private philanthropic trust, one of Australia's largest, deploying capital, particularly around Aboriginal economic empowerment. And clearly governance being quite an important mechanism that we look at to how to support, drive and enable a First Nations perspective on that. My role from a governance point of view is the Deputy Chair of the Australian Indigenous Governance Institute, or AIGI. Been in that role for about 3 years now, and certainly you can't escape the idea of Indigenous governance in any role that I've been in, and understanding of the gold standard of governance often being referred to as Westphalian governance, but we know the richness and complexity of First Nations or tribal governance that actually creates much more rigor and accountability and has far more compliance requirements than maybe what is perceived from a non-First Nations perspective. So really, really happy to have a conversation and be in conversation with people from different nations and nation groups to share some of our challenges, but also some of the strengths that we have in being able to bring our communities together under what sometimes is called theoretically a nation building strategy or a nation building ideology, but ultimately it is just the way that we've always conducted our business as peoples. And so it is a really great way to kick off this conversation, to hear the strength-based way you're introducing yourself and saying that you have a privilege and honour of being the first in 140 years. We know that's also quite a big load to carry, and in an institution that maybe hasn't necessarily oriented itself to how it can contour to Maori knowledge systems can be confronting at times and also challenging. And you say your real job, it's probably the way we have to frame it, but ultimately we know that your job is actually being responsive to iwi and your ancestors. So funny how we sometimes have to caveat what we feel like is our responsibility and our ongoing role.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it, because having that responsibility across only builds confidence, direction to where we need to go to, not only in iwi but for our own selves in our own careers, but also for generational changes. And I think if we wearing different hats, well, people see we're trying to wear different hats. We're actually wearing the same hat all the time, and that's based on our intergenerational whakaaro, kōrero, thoughts and thinking that has just transferred down through our whakapapa, through our families, to get to us to actually drive those sorts of changes that need to be in both worlds. And I keep, there are times that in the roles that we play, we always have to look back to keep moving forward. And I think that's really important to not forget in the types of roles, and acknowledging, thank you for acknowledging the Whātua Hone St. John's role, because that is a system change that's required to, at the end of the day, save people's lives, save our people's lives quicker, faster, with timely access and care. And so it's an honour and a privilege to work for our institution, such as Whātua Hone, who are prepared to make those changes for my people. And I'm only here to ensure that that happens, then the next generation can come in and lead in a different way, with pure equity focus. I wanted to talk about the concept of nation building. It's actually the first time I've heard of it, and it really intrigued me about that whole concept. And I just thought it was just natural nation building.
Yeah, it is interesting how we have to sometimes be able to put academic rigor or conceptual thinking around an idea for it to be considered knowledge that is acceptable. And there is a long history of the emergence of the nation building theory out of a Harvard project, and then the creation of the Native Nations Institute out of the University of Arizona, I believe. And ultimately, when First Nations peoples start to understand the conceptual frameworks behind it, a lot of it is common sense and the way that we would think about self-governance and the shift of power and the decision-making of a collective rather than an individual, and how those structures are created from a cultural grounding and identity perspective that is about collective within certain sovereignty bounds. And those things are all really part of our DNA. And we always orient ourselves in that particular way. And I think why it's become important now is it does offer a potential framework for communities to be able to think about how they activate some of the, I guess, dormant activities that have happened due to past policy failures. And particularly, I know quite well of Australia's context with the assimilation policy, which impacted my family directly, with my grandmother being taken when she was a 3-year-old and removed from our country and put into what was called a mission, but essentially it wasn't a mission. It was in some ways a place to be able to eradicate First Nations people's connection to identity and have an individual perspective rather than a collective. So yeah, it's sometimes for communities who are challenged by the speak of the tertiary sector, it can be a foreign concept, but actually if you draw it down to its essential purpose, I think most people do understand the two-way aspect of that, of both Western compliance, but also being accountable and responsibility to community.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think that's comes from my kōrero comes from my whakapapa, my tūpuna. And so the natural process of all the activities, the history that they've had to impact, but the foresight that they still knew that we don't when we're talking about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, when they signed the treaty, it was an intent for a better future for our people. The intent in itself, as you say, there's a loss of language, the assimilation that happened to people, to our whānau, actually makes a significant impact to today's state. And I think that's what keeps driving us to do what we need to do, and honouring our tūpuna, our ancestors' intent, right from the word go on what the Te Tiriti o Waitangi meant for them. And I think that's what nation building can be characterised in. And for tangata whenua, for our iwi, is that we went through that renaissance period after treaty settlements. What do we look like? And then we had got to paint our own picture. And these are the things that our people always talk about. Where we go back to try and paint the picture that our tūpuna have done, and that creates the look at what we can invest in, our roles that we play, our intent and our future, not just for ourselves, obviously. It's mainly for our mokos, our mokomoko, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and on and on. So having these constructs and academic work, philosophies and things, it's great because it really reinforces what our ancestors had said right from the word go, and it really enforces that we're doing what's right. And so it's really, really pleasing.
I'm interested to invite you to speak a little bit about more traditional practices of understanding how country or Mother Earth actually indicates when is the right time for sitting together to think before decisions are made, how the moon plays a particular role. I've had the privilege of working with many Māori in different international spaces and feel like that insight into understanding that the mechanism of country or Mother Earth actually is a really good governance tool that is often dismissed or not really considered as part of our decision making, and would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, that is interesting. Kōrero, because it was said that was the intent of doing the Te Tiriti o Waitangi in this instance, that we take, whenua is the most important, our moana is the most important, our whai kōrero, our thoughts, our medicines and all that, we are the kaitiaki of it. So that still plays in today's realm, governance role that I play out in Ngāti Whātua ki Kaipara. That's a landscape of whenua that has been come back in, and forest that has come back into our arms again. And so we have to really look at the economic development and potential of that forest, but making those decisions where how will it impact the waters and the rivers for our future generations, the land in itself, what can we do to ensure that we still provide the kaitiaki, the guardianship over that. And so protecting certain areas, like we call it waigi tapu, sacred areas, but also looking at what are the opportunities that we can draw from. They actually will create this economic development for our iwi for future generations, but also can actually continue to protect that. So it was leading by example to make sure that we get that right now for our future, but also to share with other communities. Whātua Forest in itself is one of the biggest forests that people live, work, and play in there. So we have a lot of responsibility of what that can look like, and we also take very seriously about our responsibility as kaitiaki, as guardians, to ensure that we are there when the right moment is required. So the water quality, advocating for those types of areas to ensure that our rivers are healthy, we are still able to fish into our rivers. And then even into housing, how does that impact in our own housing plans to ensure that we are actually having an environmental or kaitiaki view of how we deliver for not only our people, but for the communities that live on land. So it's a fine line, but we've been observing how other iwi are doing it, and I'd be quite interested to see overseas what other opportunities, like our Canadian community, Indigenous communities, and how that plays out as well. But yeah, it's just not just about looking at that, it's ensuring that we've got good governance and a kaitiaki over that.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the richness, the complexity, I guess the ecology that we look at, that traditionally we've had an obligation to, as part of our being on this world, to care for country, to make decisions that are not about individuals or groups of individuals, but about country as the starting point. And we've been wrestling with the terminology here at times about whether we use traditional ownership because it makes sense in a Western sense to have legal leverage, or whether we think about custodianship and making sure that we're playing our role within the time that we're here to ensure that it's in a better situation than we inherited it. And all of that activity has happened often because of our willingness to continue to feed into that rather than actually seeing the commercial or the economic opportunities that emerge from that. But that is probably the shift that we're seeing now, the idea of country culture, community actually having a commercial lens to that, and understanding that our really keen insight and understanding about how waters and lands work gives us a commercial and competitive advantage in very discrete fields. And the ones that we're looking at, particularly at the moment in the trust that I work at, is kind of renewable energy or the clean energy transition, and trying to get into what is essentially an industrial revolution type event. And that if our leverage over land is overlooked, then we could potentially miss that really significant economic opportunity that is not just about the now, but actually will help future generations of communities be able to leverage that ongoing revenue stream to feed back into nation building activities, continue to strengthen the decision making and ability to access not only economic opportunity, but access country in a meaningful way to be able to continue to revitalise and regenerate what unfortunately has been destroyed from a lot of Western practices of extraction. So we are just as interested as you, and unfortunately in my role, I do get to spend time kind of in the macro level, kind of looking across where there is really great pockets of examples of this happening, and try to create the relationship and knowledge exchange to happen more freely than kind of seeing the competitive position that we often are put in to be able to say that we need to go at this alone. Yeah, so that is all in front of us at the moment. And unfortunately, in this instance, we have to juggle both the time it takes to do the nation building work well, or being able to get people kind of collectively aiming towards the same vision, but also managing proponents or big energy companies or mining companies trying to put deals in front of us. Maybe slightly different because there isn't as much mining activity happening across Aotearoa, but it is Australia's economy is built on extractives. And so we need to understand how that mentality or that idea shouldn't just necessarily be replicated within the clean energy transition. So much to think about, and importantly, just a great opportunity for our communities to get in at the ground floor where traditionally we've been ignored.
Definitely agree with it. Just wanted to touch on the renewable energy component and the demand of our entities and what we own and all that sort of stuff, and the opportunities rather than challenges. Because I think if we reshape it to that what our ancestors want to what we think should happen in the future, you can see the storytelling, and so we need to tell that story to the companies that this is a long, authentic journey that we must take. Because this has to be authentic partnership in everything we do, and that what their impact is now and into the future impacts directly to our people and our whakapapa, our family trees and all that sort of stuff. Telling that narrative and continuing that narrative within those entities is extremely important, because that's the role that we have to play for our people.
And you did raise a good point about governance being the driver, and governance is quite an interesting concept because it can sometimes be maybe incorrectly defined as a board rather than actually corporate governance. Governance as a way to be able to bring insight, foresight, oversight into an organisation and their impact on the communities that we serve. Even within corporate spaces, governance also then takes a very different shift when their stakeholders are often shareholders, and so decisions are made to be able to get the best return to shareholders. So there's a very complex and different view on governance being a tool for economic development, but one that I think we often get ignored on the strength that we have from a traditional owner, First Nations, Native Nations, tribal governance, that there is a lot more accountability on that end than maybe what is within the regulatory environment in the nations that we operate within. I'm very interested to hear from your perspective, Claire. Maybe you've seen some really good policy interventions or some work of your own community to be able to establish good governance across multiple different views.
Yeah. It is quite interesting because I'm very lucky to have a whānau family of brothers, and that have been strong in iwi governance and leadership. And so taking it from their point of view and transferring it into my own learning, because my own learning has really come from a mainstream structural governance style. But I really still feel that that's really important. But the tikanga that we bring in from a Te Ao Māori lens is actually of higher value than just the systems and the processes, because I think tikanga actually can enhance the systems and processes that we have to be rigid to achieve the same outcomes. Tikanga is a values and principle based that actually helps guide us to get to where we need to go to in the decisions that we make. It's not just based on the structures of the system or the organisation. It's actually measured by our intent on what we're going to do with our whenua, our land, value of our moana, the value of our people. And so we are holding that and centralising the tikanga of how we are going to be, then the systems of governance actually have to respect that to flow through back down to make an impact for our people. So tikanga within a governance system should never be undervalued. It's a centralised approach to ensure that the ripple effects actually hit and feel for our people. And I think that's where the strength of Indigenous people can come into. If they place tikanga or value-based systems that have been brought to through generations, and then the vision and the moe the dreams of our people, and pull that, and then the rules of governance actually plays out through tikanga. So it's really, really important. I've observed that. They also say that we really need good systems in that to ensure that we are the best kaitiaki, the best guardians of our tikanga and of our systems, to ensure that everything goes in place and well, and also that takes us back to being accountable. Because, as I said before, we're not here for our own generation now. We're 2-3 generations, and honestly, that's all my mother kept on saying to me. It's not about you. It's not about my moko, it's about my moko and tōmeno. And that's where the tikanga really sits. It's the future of our generations. So, and that in itself can start building economic development, our decisions made. our decisions based on our tikanga, ensure economic development can derive for the value of our whenua, of our people. And so we need to ensure that that does happen. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think
Turn
that
on.
that governance isn't a fixed measure; it's an ongoing practice or process, and giving life to it from a First Nations perspective actually adds strength from a Western compliance or Westphalian governance perspective as well. It just maybe has often been overlooked, the amount of rigor, complexity, internal negotiations that happen. And yes, there's bad actors across every single governance entity or structure that could exist, but often we are remembered for those small incidences rather than actually the kind of strength that we bring just by the way we are in the world. And think about the future. I'm kind of in a unique position at times to be within a policy environment in government, or in this instance, recommending where quite significant capital can be deployed to activate economic aspiration. Ultimately, that still sits within a decision-making mechanism that is Western. And that's where I guess that wedge between that as a interpreter becomes really important, of how you translate communities' positionality into digestible or socializable information to decision makers. So it's an interesting, sometimes challenging environment. But as you said at the very beginning of this, it's kind of, we've been put in these roles for a particular reason. No doubt our ancestors laid this path for us and gave us this responsibility to kind of do that. And I sometimes can find myself having a small pity party about the position I'm in, and recognise that my grandmother would have loved to have actually been in my position, and probably would tell me to stop complaining at times as well. So the idea to make sure that you're still working towards that ancestral goal, is really a great way to be able to think about it.
Yeah, because I guess what the my question would be, your experience of community-led initiatives, your whakapapa, your generational thinking from your grandparents, your grandmother, and that. How has effective governance changed your way of investing and for your people, and how do you see it feel and hit your communities?
I would say it's probably the biggest unlock of self-determination. Self-determination has always been something in a principle-based approach within the Australian context, often under-resourced and potentially overlooked by those who have influence over our communities. In particular, government has always had a very strong influence since colonisation over how we are in the world and what opportunities we get and don't get. And so the idea to be able to transition into the economy or have an economic lens is in some ways new and emerging, whilst it has been happening for, let's say, 40 years. In the concept of time, that is really just a blip. And so our communities did a great job to be able to respond to the opportunity of native title. It's not for me to be able to say whether the native title system is working or not. There's challenges that are experienced by that, but our communities recognise the opportunity to secure land. But that shift now to how you activate the economic opportunity of land is just going to take time, and often that is a mentality shift before you would actually see an attitudinal and behavioural shift occur. But the expectation of funders, government, philanthropy, corporates, is that we need to meet them where they're at. And the reality of that sometimes is just not feasible. And so we are constantly having to build our ship while sailing. And it's not necessarily a opportunity or something we shy away from. Our communities are constantly, with very little resources, trying to meet the expectations of others to be able to unlock resources. And sometimes it's even a challenge to unlock our own resources, and a very similar structure where quite significant asset bases are sitting in trusts or investment that we are unable to unlock. And one of the reasons we're unable to unlock that is a demonstration of good governance. And so they unfortunately will sit in under deeds and sit within trust structures where only a small portion of that money can be accessed to be able to invest in our own activities, rather than kind of just investing into the market as it exists. So lots of challenges, but I think there has been quite a significant shift, and I think that shift has taken the right amount of time. You can't just expect communities to automatically reorient themselves when you have to recognise the needs approach that communities are operating under, with a lot of social determinants being really in not a great position, unacceptably, I think, from a government point of view. It shouldn't often never been allowed to get to that. So our communities have this constant juggle of where do you invest and how do you think about the future, and who gets overlooked in those decisions are often a really complex and challenging decision made.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that complexities to be translated back down to the whānau, the family, the community. It can actually be the struggle as well. It can be the hard one, is that the intent is always there. The pressure from our own people, the pressure from government and everyone else is actually, that's real for us, because at the end of the day, need to go back to our own families and, speak on their behalf and translate what that complexity actually looks like. And when you're being put in a system where it's not fit for our people and our vision, and that, it's very hard to see the impact, the generational intent right now, but with the hope that we can do that through really good, strong governance, strong strategy, strong communication with our whānau, good sustainable planning, generational leadership to come into play is actually super important in terms of my life anyway. It's like when we're talking about our children, and my why is I want the role modeling I'm doing for my children is for them to look at what they can see, for them to lead on my behalf and my whānau behalf. Is, just be like you with your whānau.
I definitely could not have said that any better. I think that's a great summary of the conversation, and also kind of the idea of governance as a driver, and that economic development isn't the starting point. It's actually a byproduct of doing these things well. Accountability, transparency, understanding cultural legitimacy, having really clear and endorsed strategy in place are all fundamentals. And you can't get to that position of thinking about how you participate in the current economy without those things. I guess the question then begs, if you were to think about conceptually what that looks like and as a driver from our mentality, like, have you seen good examples of that in Aotearoa or elsewhere?
In terms of strong governance and it reflecting down to the
Yeah.
impact of our communities, I have. But I've seen it from the start all the way through to where from how hard it was to actually how it can be thriving. And, I'm very observant to my own iwi at Ngāti Whātua Wārake, which my brothers are on the board there, the struggle, the 20-year plan the 3-year plan that they had, then the 20-year plan. Now they've got a 100-year plan because of the strength of their systems and the belief of who they are, of the partners that they have brought into our world. We don't step into their world, they stepped into our world. The relationships that have continued with the councils, with government, with education and that has taken a journey, but that took a lot of journey through good management, good governance, good foresight for getting the right leaders in the right time and the right space, a lot of training that put in place. Our economic growth has been based on cultural identity, being self-determined, not being the dependent. We've seen changes in our housing from a deprivation view, or lack of resources, to actually providing the skills and education sets, so then our whānau can grow and be in the self and grow into tino rangatiratanga and self-determination to actually choose which healthy home they choose to live in, or buy, or things like that. So it's not about having switched from a dependency model to an empowering model. So that's where self-determination is really, really important, and just knowing that being our cultural identity, as I said, based on our tikanga, is extremely the most central thing we can do for our people. Because once our whānau know, like and once you have that tribal connection, the whakapapa, the whenua on the land that you walk on is yours, your identity and your confidence starts to build. And then so you want to contribute back as a good iwi member in any way that you do. And so that's not about being part of the governance system or being at the marae. It's actually just, doing the fundamentals of being a good iwi person, learning about our karakia, learning about our prayers and, things that actually our generation needs right now. We need to get right now for our future generation. So, the governance system itself isn't just about economic development, because as I said, that will grow. It's about centralizing the most important thing that could actually help grow the economic development, and that's our own people. And so that's building our cultural knowledge and our cultural strength in itself. So, yeah, that's something I've really taken on board, like all the time. I look at my girls, and they're doing kapahaka, like kōrero, they're up at the marae. They are singing, they are being their best self as Ngāti Whātua, and that's all I see at the moment, and that where I can measure impact. Yeah, and would that be reflective?
Yeah, I'm smiling a lot at what you're talking about, because sometimes you can enforce a segue, but I think if I was to cite a specific example about it not necessarily always being about the traditional owner group or the specific community that's thinking about governance, but how you bring those principles into other forms or other entities that require good cultural governance. And the example I often cite is Aboriginal housing Victoria, and obviously it's an issue that matters deeply to both of us. I didn't explain this at the beginning, but I actually have a health background as well. So understanding how housing is a foundation for better life outcomes, particularly health, has always been an interest area of mine. And that organisation prior to 2014 was essentially a landlord of government-owned housing assets. They were providing culturally appropriate housing for First Nations people in Victoria, but there was limitations on what they could do because they were essentially just a landlord. And I always want to reference those who are trailblazers or who are amazing at a particular moment in time. And Jenny Sams is a woman who came from, I think, 30 plus years of government experience pushing against that system or trying to reform internally, but used her experience coming into the CEO role at Aboriginal Housing Victoria to recognise an opportunity to be able to request the government actually release the title of those housing assets to the organisation, which was always going to be a significant undertaking, and particularly a focus on governance, which required resources, a lot of time spent, but also financial resources, which they had to make a very intentional decision to do that. And over a 12-month, 18-month period, they secured the right registration as a community housing provider, which gave the government confidence that they could release under a tranched agreement those housing assets. And 3 years after that, 1,500 properties were handed over to that organisation with an asset base of about 500 million. And then the confidence gained in a relationship between those meant that they actually devolved policy-making responsibilities to that organisation as well. And they developed the Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Framework, or whānau Morteen Man Takut, which means every Aboriginal person deserves a home. COVID occurred during that period of time as well, and fortunately that framework being developed recognised the inequitable experience of homelessness of First Nations people in Victoria, which was 10 times the rate of any other community. And so they put in their framework that 10% of all investment into social and affordable housing should go towards First Nations people. And then the government released their big housing build budget, which was $5.2 billion, which then they adopted that strategy, and automatically $500 million went into Aboriginal housing in Victoria. So they then went from having essentially no assets to 1,500 properties, and then support of $5 million worth of granting into creating more secure infrastructure for communities. So it just shows that that wasn't an economic play. That was about providing better housing for First Nations people, but now they have economic influence and can ensure that people have that really strong housing foundation they need to be able to thrive in today's society.
Yeah, because that's a really good example, because, housing is essential for health, is essential for us to thrive in language in a safe way, so we can thrive in who we are, show our culture within our own homes. So that gives that entity in itself can give that self-determination and impact per each house that whānau families are living in. That's the positive impact of what those types of decisions being made right now. One example I've just experienced last year, my iwi hat with Ngāti Whātua ki kaipara, is that I co-chair a group, legislative group with Auckland Council called Te Poare ki Kaipātiki ki kaipara. So Kaipātiki is a place, is a reserve. It's a thermal energy. It's the only thermal energy waters in Auckland, and so I chair that group. And part of the Kaipātiki Reserve funding got put, joint funding got granted through Auckland Council to create a 10-year plan of bringing back the ngahere, the vegetation, reducing pests, create a safe space for families, not just our own, to play in, bring back the communities. And so when we're looking at place-based things like housing or health or just places, the ripple effects actually are significant for our own people. And then from that, we have a thermal hole there that's been leased out for 30 years. It's 60 years old and it's been leased out for 30 years to a non-iwi provider. And when I came on board, the first thing I said, we will never lease any more assets out to non-tribal providers. It will be held within our co-governance. We will ensure that the waters are rejuvenated and revitalised, because the waters go back into our river, who is the central point of our tribe and of all our marae around the river area. And so we consciously looked at what was our role in a co-governance model and our responsibilities to be a good partner for our community and all those decisions that had to be made. And, that was a decision that was 6 months before the new lease was supposed to come up. And so we took that on board and made that decision. We changed the name back to Kaipātiki, which was the traditional name. And we changed everything, the look and feel. But the main thing that made me happy about the whole thing was that my uncle came up to me and gave me the biggest hug. And he said, the day I walked in there knowing that Kaipātiki was ours, really fulfilled everything I have ever dreamt of. And, these simple things make impact, because he'll go home proud that he's, that he owns these, a good contributor to his community. And I think that's the ripple effects of these governance systems and economic development changes that need to be made, but also we need to reflect on how does that impact, how do we control the negative environments that we have to be constantly navigating through to control and to maintain focus on the next future generations at the same time. It's hard, but I think we do it really well.
Oh, that is a very good summary. It's hard, but we do it well. I think that positive regard and that we're doing the best we can is sometimes even overlooked by our own communities, but certainly overlooked by others in this space who have influence over our decisions at times. But I think your point really does show that economic development is a means for a better life outcome. It's not actually the end game, that to make more money for no reason, just to have access to capital, is not the driver. It's actually to be able to reinvest back into our people to make sure that their wellness is as best as it can be, which is really, in terms of a socioeconomic return, almost impossible to put a dollar figure on. There are people who are saying that every dollar invested into that type of model has a $5 plus return. So that should be exciting to investors, to government, particularly in public policy. But unfortunately, it's not necessarily always given the life and the immediacy or the short-term thinking that often influences our decision-making. Can be a real tension point where we see opportunity, but is that really the opportunity we should be going for? How are we to know that? Do we get authorization from community? Community are our ultimate test, and that hug that you get from your uncle actually is the measure of success. It's not actually whether you unlocked a significant grant, it's that you've done right by community. So tricky to be able to articulate that to people who have a very singular view on what success looks like. And it's why I really love having these conversations, because we can just get to the nub of the opportunity, but also that it's just not always as straightforward as what people might think it is.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely like said exactly like that whole restrictions about the single-mindedness. I'm really proud of my iwi of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei who actually invite people to join them, not the other way around. So it actually determines how our roles and our tikanga is placed within that invitation itself. If you're not in that invitation, then you're not in that invitation, because you have to be part of that journey with us. Very lucky, well, not lucky, we're well thought out with a 100-year strategy. And so we can start choosing who our partners are and invite them in.
Yeah, that is I think the next era for us, to be much more selective on why we partner, who we take money from, who we decide not to, who gets the right to even be in relationship with us. It's always just been assumed that because of the way that the colonial project has worked, that in some ways we're seen as something that can be a possession or can be influenced just because we don't fit the criteria or the mold of kind of whiteness. But ultimately, I think there is that shift in power that will happen. It's being resisted in basically every space that I see, but ultimately our communities will continue to draw back on ancestral strength. Obviously, we're resilient by the nature of how we've had to operate, but I think what's often overlooked is that we have always been masters of our environment, and whatever context that is in, we'll eventually become masters of that. And if it's Western compliance or it's Western economics, our people are really starting to demonstrate the sophistication and the models that we can deploy to actually have great success in that space as well, but never forgetting kind of the main driver and the orientation towards our cultural lineage. I guess if there's one thing that I'd like to hear, and it would be great to share for any listeners, viewers of this, is just, I guess, advice that you would provide of communities who are a little bit later to this, haven't had the opportunity of what their starting point might be, or ways that they might be able to think about really getting started in their nation building journey.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because there's so much I've seen, but there's also so much I haven't seen. So there's a lot of things that happen behind closed doors that you're not privy to. So, trying to think about where to start, it'll be talking to the people who are behind those closed doors before you start building your nation, because they can enable you to show that type of leadership that's required, or the type of thinking that's required to get into that thinking. It's seriously not about setting up a trust or a structure or anything like that. It's about being beside the right people, listening at the right time to actually have that thought process of what that looks like. And I've been absolutely lucky to have many, many leaders where I have been behind closed doors, or I've missed out, and I'm like knocking on the uncle's doors saying, hey, can you help me here? I've got I've got some serious thinking about this. How can I unpack it? So you're surrounding yourself with the right people to start that thought process, because they probably have that same thought process at one time or another. And so that is the most important thing, I feel, to protect yourself, to ensure that you have a pool of resources for your own individual, so then you can actually start playing that out. Also, whānau and communities are very different, are very important, but very different, because our whānau live in communities. So we have to remember what our whānau do and what we provide for our whānau is our strategy for our tribe. But that strategy for our tribe, our moe, our aspirations, that actually had a ripple effect for our community that our whānau live in. So we have to look at both sides of how we can contribute, not only to our whānau and to the environment and that. We actually have to look at how does that impact the growth of a community that our whānau live in. And so, example, in Kaipātiki, I know the investment that we're putting into my whānau, our whānau in that area, and the changes that we make in our community actually creates economic development and opportunities for the community. And so I can see that the pools that we have right now, with putting money into redeveloping and things like that, that's going to have more people into the pools. They're going to go to the dairy down the road. So that's going to create growth. It's going to create more people wanting work there. So the economic development that we're doing for our own iwi and structures that we're trying to build in our vision, we have to consider our communities that our whānau are living in. And so that's it, that they're playing in and they're working in and that. So we have to capture those voices as well. And that's the added advantage. Everything else, partnerships. We talk about authentic partners. And I think we need to really unpack the authentic partners down and actually look at what type of partnerships we want, good and bad, because, the bad ones, they don't, sometimes they just don't know any better. And they're not bad. They're just, they're important for our communities. But how do we take them onto the journey? They come into our world. How do we take them onto that journey? And that would actually start shaping their intent in the communities that we are living in, playing in that. So we can start doing that. We got to do it very, very mindfully and authentically, and bringing back is the next steps of being accountable to each other. A lot of funders, having a relationship with funders, government, and that, it's all very, in mind, short-term piecemeal funding. We got to move that away and just go, what do we want in our authentic partnership that can actually manage for this part of your journey? It's not our journey, because our journey is this big. What can we do to manage this part of your journey? How can we achieve that authentically? And I think that as long as that contributes to the longer term, I think those authentic partnerships are true right there. I worked in government for years, changing policy on family prevention, family violence, and everything, like in elder abuse, and it's fundamental how important it is to note that what the government's only there for a short period of time. The government of the day are there for a short period of time. So reflecting on those types of partnerships for the long term, looking at a short period of time, is actually really essential. And not many people look at it like that. They just think it's a roll over and roll over, but I just really encourage you to do that. Systems and structures, I do have to say, I am a system person because it protects our people. It protects the good things that we're trying to do. It protects the trust assets that we must do, make those decisions. It protects the entities and the buildings and everything like that on behalf of my members that are under the trust. And so I always feel like I will look at it like a family trust, the family, and there is the holder on behalf of my family. Not behalf of the uri, is that I'm there for my auntie, I'm there for my uncle, I'm there for my sister, and to me, and so on. So having a look at the systems, we're a kaitiaki of those systems, and a kaitiaki, and we utilise those systems for the benefit of for our people. I do go on and on about systems and policies and that, because I've had some very bad experiences, but I just really have to hone in. We're protectors. We are there for a certain period of time, and we have to bring in the emerging leaders to, once we leave, we can leave it in good hands, and then to me, and goes on and on. So yeah, it is quite an interesting one to try and work
That
out.
role is sometimes without thanks and can feel at times that you are a burden on people. But I think in most instances, people do extremely value that and would be open to being able to describe that management of systems as a protective factor to manage risk is crucial, and crucial for the survival of entities and organisations, but crucial for the deployment of resources and the opportunities that are ahead of us. And I think you've summarised exactly what I would probably have contributed to that you don't have to go it alone. There are people who can share and are willing to share their experiences, and it is only that we're considering competition at times, that we have to be in isolation in this work and never overlook community. There's only one thing that will remain consistent, and it is community. Governments will come and go, and so will different individuals and different organisations, but community will always be the litmus test of success and authorisation. So it is, the things that you can control are really important starting points. What are the principles that you want to underpin at the beginning of it? You cited numerous principles that you could easily have as a very, very useful starting point. And also don't be too ashamed or show too much ego in that there are blind spots from individuals, from knowledge holders, that are things like financial acumen and technical skills. They can all be learnt. And so be comfortable to say we actually have weakness in this area and it would be useful to bring in some expertise. Yeah, so all pretty basic starting points, but I think sometimes can be overlooked. I think we have strong alignment, and similarly, I think we could speak about this for hours.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess that's the thing, like you touched on bringing the people in that where you don't have that capability and or knowledge within your own communities. And have you had any lessons from from your investment or development models that you've observed or been part of that other Indigenous or nations can learn from? That's really important.
Yeah, and sometimes the barrier to this is access to the financial means to be able to execute some of that. There are many organisations who have pro bono support from a legal point of view that are kind of sitting there waiting for people to approach them, but it can be difficult to surface who are the good actors in this space. But ultimately, it's a live consideration that we have at the moment about deals being made without the same knowledge being at the negotiation table. And often the intervention for us when we consider it is how do you bring the right technical expertise that can create more advantageous commercial deals for the long term. That's particularly an intervention that we're curious about, but it can be difficult to know when the right time is to bring someone in, or again, financially, do you have the means to do that? And kind of slowing down a negotiation can feel uncomfortable, but sometimes that might be the way to be able to take a step back and understand whether you're maybe rushing and it's not the community's priority, or you don't actually have the specific, really complex technical knowledge to be able to make an informed decision. And at the end of the day, governance is about triaging information to make the best decision for the entity or the community. And I think just understanding that sometimes we forget how important that role is. It's always a word of consideration that I would say where I've seen it work really well.
That was interesting how you caught me on that triage of information to make the right decision. That in itself, because you get so much information, and it can come from an authentic place, or it can come from their intent on different perspectives, and to actually triage that information, you can't do that alone, because you're making future generation decisions. You're making what we call them okapuna decisions. And so having the skills, not only on any governance level, but as you said, bringing the experts in, understanding that the lack of finances is there. And that's true for most communities. It's true, but how do you tap into those that can actually offer help? And there's those underlying ones that could be just behind the scenes, just helping you maneuver certain places with either within your own community or within your own networks. It's not only triaging, it's like corralling everyone together and then triage in a place that you go, okay, that's a good decision. And you took it back before where, it's hard. It's hard to make this decision. And when you come to a place where it may, people don't like it. But how on the community end, how would you communicate that to your communities? And how do you support your own well-being, your own whānau, when you're having to make tough decisions that maybe other people in communities aren't appreciative or don't like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a topic in and of itself of how you support leaders to not feel isolated, to know that they are just trying to do their best with what they have in front of them. You see a lot of that burnout, and particularly people who should be coming into the later stage of their life, being able to celebrate, acknowledge, kind of put their feet up, but often are broken individuals who, aren't necessarily given the credit until sometimes even their passing about the work that they actually were able to do within their time. So always lifting the gaze to give people that tap on the shoulder or that hug can sometimes mean a lot. And I think, people often kind of overlook those really simple things of being able to just say to someone, I see you and see the work that you're doing, and it is meaningful and it is making an impact for the better for our community.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that self-care is really, really important while you're in these types of roles, leadership roles. And you said, yeah, I agree. This could be a whole new segment of how do you take care of yourself? Because I have seen many, many people pass way too early and be told about how great they are after at their tangi, knowing that we could have said it then. And I think that self-care moment we keep forgetting is actually having the confidence to talk freely and open with people. Like I was at a hui a couple of weeks ago, I was saying to whānau, but we're in a really hard space. It's tough. And just, they want to hear how tough it is, but also they want to feel the confidence that you're okay to continue representing them on their behalf and the good decision making. So then they can start being part of that journey with you. And then, they might give you a hug or they might tell you off again, but, you're sharing something that's personal because you're doing the same journey of journey with them as well. And so, they do appreciate that. It also doesn't take away that we should be doing our own self-care. I am very big on that, especially in the holder space of making sure that we do that as well as given in these types of roles.
What a great way to think about potentially the closing of this to get a whack or to get a growling from our ancestors, our communities, our elders actually does show care. It still shows an interest and a level of support that doesn't necessarily always feel great in the moment, but it is an important reminder that it actually just shows there's still care. It's just that they care in their own way. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to have a yarn with me. Obviously, it can feel sometimes a little bit uncomfortable if you haven't met someone before, having a dialogue or a conversation about these things. But I think when our starting point is often a very shared view of the support that we want to be able to provide to our communities in our day-to-day roles or in the roles that we have from a governance point of view. I think we always come together quite quickly in sharing our own stories and where we see the opportunities in our community.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you so much. It's given me the ability to reflect on our role and it's on my role myself and having that shared thought, shared thinking, coming back to how do we grow our economic empire for the future. It really hones into we're doing exactly what our tupuna and our ancestors wanted us to do. Hence why they signed the treaty with that intent to grow our people and strong and confident, and for us to make mokopuna decisions based on tikanga, based on the values and principles, what we've learned, but also in protecting those sorts of environments that we are lost through assimilation and colonization. And that's our role to protect, but also grow in a very well-balanced way. So then, my grandchild who's Māori and Chinese can walk on the mountain, the Maunga, very confidently that their grandmother walked there, their great grandmother walked there. So, having that freedom and ability to self-determine on what they want to do is making good mokopuna decisions based on how we do things right now. So I'm really proud of the kōrero that was shared, the strength that we can bring in for our people, but also the opportunities. I feel like we're in a really exciting space, and challenging, but really exciting that this is going to be game changer for our people.
Beautiful. Thanks, mate.